Ryan's Office Revenge. On the morning they announced our most profitable quarter in 15 years, my boss handed me a gift that made my stomach turn. Not because it was offensive, because it was honest. "Hell of a year, Maxwell," Oliver Bennett said, dropping a shrink-wrapped desk calendar onto my workstation like he was delivering junk mail. "Figured you'd need this to track all those late nights you've been pulling." My name's Maxwell Reed. I'm 49 years old, and until a few months ago, I was a senior operations director at Apex Solutions. That morning, I was about to learn exactly what 23 years of loyalty was worth to them. The plastic crinkled under the fluorescent lights. The cover showed a generic sunset over mountains, with the kind of inspirational quote you'd find in a dentist's office. Inside the front cover, scrawled in black Sharpie, were 4 words: "Keep crushing it. Oliver." No mention of the $58 million profit we'd just celebrated. No acknowledgement of the 3 major client contracts I'd personally kept from imploding. Just a calendar that still had the clearance sticker partially peeled off the back. I turned it over slowly while he stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the reaction he'd scripted in his head. Maybe some performative gratitude about how thoughtful he was, a self-deprecating joke about needing help staying organized. Instead, I looked up at him and said, "Thanks." No inflection, just acknowledgement. He smirked, gave my shoulder a patronizing squeeze, and walked back toward the glass-walled offices where this quarter's profits were already being converted into executive bonuses and stock options that somehow never applied to anyone below director level. I sat there staring at that calendar for a long time. On the cover, beneath the sunset photo, our company logo gleamed in embossed foil. Below that, in smaller print, "Celebrating excellence together." That word, together. I slipped the calendar into my bag when I left that evening. Not because I planned to use it, but because I knew exactly where it was going to end up the next morning. Let me back up and explain how it got to this point. How a cheap piece of cardboard became the most expensive thing Oliver ever handed anyone. I joined Apex Solutions 23 years ago, straight out of the Navy after 8 years of service. Those Navy years weren't just about following orders and keeping equipment running. I'd spent my last 4 years as a logistics specialist, responsible for procurement oversight on a destroyer. When you're managing supply contracts for a $2 billion warship, you learn to spot discrepancies fast. A $50,000 parts order that shows up as $500 worth of hardware gets your attention real quick. The Navy doesn't tolerate vendor fraud, and they taught us to verify everything. Invoice against delivery, specification against actual product, approved vendor against billing entity. Back then, Apex was 40 people working out of a renovated warehouse with exposed ductwork and a ping-pong table someone insisted was essential for morale. We shipped client solutions on Sunday nights, broke things, fixed them at 3 a.m., and ordered takeout instead of filing incident reports. Recognition was straightforward. If something worked, you got to sleep. If it didn't, you stayed awake until it did. The transition from military to civilian wasn't easy. In the Navy, incompetence had consequences. Supply chain failures could endanger lives. Vendor fraud was a federal crime. In corporate America, I discovered, these same issues were often treated as cost of doing business or learning opportunities. That started changing around year 18. We landed Fortune 500 clients. Venture capital arrived, and suddenly the warehouse got marble floors and a polished logo. The founders traded sneakers for tailored suits and spent more time in conference rooms than at their desks. HR appeared as an actual department, using phrases like retention strategies and recognition frameworks, corporate speak for we'd like to appear like we care without spending real money. That's when Oliver Bennett entered the picture. On paper, he was perfect middle management material. MBA from a decent school, 6 years at a larger firm, could say strategic alignment and synergy in the same sentence without flinching. He arrived talking about optimizing human capital investments and leveraging core competencies. Within 4 months, he'd figured out how Apex operated. People like me made things happen. People like him took credit for it. He'd wander into meetings 15 minutes late, skim project dashboards for 5 minutes, then repeat something I'd explained half an hour earlier, only louder, with more confident hand gestures. Leadership ate it up. He's really taking ownership, they'd say. I didn't hate him. My military background taught me to respect the chain of command, even when you disagreed with it. But respect and trust are different things. In the Navy, you could disagree with your CO's strategy, but you knew he understood the mission. Oliver understood presentations, not operations. For years, that division worked fine. I understood my role, he understood how to look like he understood his. The military had prepared me for working under less than ideal leadership. You focus on the mission, not the politics. Then Apex decided we needed a culture of appreciation. The recognition program launched with HR sending beautifully designed emails about honoring your journey and thoughtfully curated gifts matched to your impact. They showed sample items during company meetings: engraved pens, noise-canceling headphones, custom jackets with your name embroidered on the chest. People applauded. Someone joked, maybe sticking around actually pays off now. I was approaching my 23-year mark. No plaques, no certificates, no complaints. I wasn't there for swag, but when they described the milestone packages, something meaningful to honor years of building Apex solutions, I won't pretend I didn't think that. Might be nice. I hit my 23-year mark in June. I received a templated email. Congratulations on reaching your milestone anniversary. We couldn't do this without dedicated people like you. There was clip art of a cake. No gift, no mention at the company meeting, nothing. I shrugged it off. We'd just finished a brutal client implementation that had consumed 3 months of 12-hour days. The project had been falling apart when Oliver handed it to me with a casual, "See what you can do with this." What I did was apply the same systematic approach I'd used in the Navy. Identify critical path dependencies, establish clear accountability chains, and monitor progress with military precision. We delivered on time and under budget. Oliver presented the success story to the board. He never mentioned my role. I was too exhausted to chase after token gifts anyway. Then Q4 numbers came in, and everything changed. You can always tell when a company's had a strong financial year. Small signs appear. Small. First, catered lunches become slightly fancier. The coffee in the break room upgrades from generic to branded. Mysterious construction noise starts happening on the executive floor. Then, there are the unmistakable signs. At Apex Solutions, it was CEO Lucas Hayes standing on the small stage in our main conference hall, wearing his trademark navy blazer and no tie. He clicked to the Q4 results slide with visible satisfaction. The numbers were staggering compared to where we'd started. Revenue up 41% to $195 million, or net profit up 58% to $58 million, best quarter in company history. "We did this together," he said, beaming at the crowd. "Every single one of you made this possible." People clapped. A few whistled. Someone in the back shouted something congratulatory. The slide that followed was considerably less celebratory. Cash bonuses deferred to Q2 pending board review. Lucas launched into a speech we'd heard variations of before. Reinvesting in infrastructure, positioning for sustainable growth, compensation isn't just about immediate financial reward. I watched the faces around me. Some looked disappointed. Most just looked resigned. Bonuses had been deferred 4 years running. But this time felt different. We weren't barely scraping by anymore. We were breaking records. My wife Hannah and I had been talking about retirement planning more seriously lately. At 49, with our daughter starting her sophomore year at State, every deferred bonus was money that could have gone toward her tuition or our retirement accounts. We did get an email that afternoon, though. Holiday appreciation gifts will be distributed to all team members this week. A small gesture of our gratitude. That small gesture was the $6 calendar waiting on my desk the next morning. I flipped it over and found the manufacturer's information. Opened my browser, typed in the product code. Retail price, $8.99. Bulk corporate pricing, $5.75 per unit. My eyes drifted to the monitor across the floor. Still cycling through yesterday's presentation slides. Net profit, $58 million. I could have let it go. Everyone around me seemed to. But something about the gap between that number on the screen and the cheapness in my hands pulled at a thread that had been unraveling for years. More than that, it triggered something from my Navy training that I'd thought I'd left behind. During my time as a logistics specialist, we had a saying, trust but verify. When a vendor submitted an invoice for $50,000 worth of specialized engine parts, you didn't just approve it because they had the right letterhead. You verified the parts, matched the specifications, confirmed the quantities delivered, and cross-checked against approved vendor lists. I'd caught 3 separate procurement fraud attempts during my service. Vendors billing for premium components while delivering standard grade, phantom deliveries that existed only on paper, and kickback schemes between purchasing officers and suppliers. The skills don't just disappear when you trade Navy utilities for business casual. My military procurement training kicked in. I opened our internal finance portal. Senior directors had access to budget categories for resource allocation planning. I navigated to the employee recognition expenses. Annual budget, $145,000. Below that, a vendor line item, Premier Business Services Q4. Invoice, $38,600. Description: premium executive calendars and holiday appreciation packages. The math didn't add up. $38,600 divided by our employee count of 120 people came to over $321 per package. Even accounting for sample units and shipping, we were looking at premium pricing for what was clearly a bargain bin product. Someone was billing us for premium and delivering discount store quality. This was exactly the kind of discrepancy that would have triggered a full audit review in the Navy. In corporate America, apparently, it was just Tuesday. I knew exactly who had championed Premier Business Services as our cost-effective recognition vendor during last year's budget planning meetings, Oliver Bennett. He'd presented a slick PowerPoint about streamlined procurement processes and vendor relationship optimization. The board approved his recommendation without much discussion. I dug deeper into the finance portal. Premier Business Services had been our exclusive recognition vendor for the past 4 years. Total invoiced amount, $273,000. All invoices approved by Oliver, with no documented quality complaints, no credit memos, no follow-up correspondence about delivery discrepancies. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the calendar, my laptop, and those quarterly numbers echoing in my head. Hannah came in halfway through my clicking and cross-referencing. "What are you doing?" she asked, noting the spreadsheets and documents scattered across the table. "Trying to figure out how much my keep crushing it actually cost," I said, holding up the calendar. She picked it up, examined the cheap construction, the peeling clearance sticker. "This is what they gave you for 15 years? This is what they gave everyone." But according to the invoices, they paid premium prices for premium gifts. Hannah had been married to a Navy logistics specialist for long enough to recognize the signs. You found something. I found a pattern. 4 years of billing discrepancies that add up to $250,000. She watched my face. You're not upset about the calendar itself? No, I replied. I'm upset about what it represents, and I'm curious about where the rest of that money went. She didn't tell me to drop it. Military spouses understand the importance of following procedures and completing missions. She just said, if you pull that thread, be ready for whatever unravels with it. I pulled it anyway, because there's a point where frustration becomes clarity. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. The Navy had taught me that financial irregularities rarely exist in isolation. They're symptoms of larger, systemic problems. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a different perspective. This wasn't about hurt feelings over a cheap gift. This was about fiduciary responsibility and vendor accountability. In the military, this kind of procurement fraud was a federal offense. In corporate America, it might just be poor oversight, but it was still wrong. I spent my lunch break doing additional research. Premier Business Services had a website that looked professional enough. Stock photos of smiling office workers, testimonials from satisfied corporate clients, a catalog of premium recognition solutions. But when I dug into their business registration, something interesting emerged. The company was registered to a residential address, 1847 Riverside Drive, Unit 4B. A quick search of our internal employee directory showed that Oliver Bennett had listed Ryan Clark as his emergency contact. Ryan Clark, who, according to social media, was Oliver's college roommate and best man at his wedding. Ryan Clark, who lived at 1847 Riverside Drive, Unit 4B, the same address as Premier Business Services. This wasn't just vendor mismanagement or poor quality control. This was structured fraud, and it had been happening under our noses for 4 years. Oliver wasn't just incompetent. He was stealing from us. That afternoon was another company-wide meeting, framed as celebrating our record quarter. Same slides, same talking points about resilience and teamwork. But this time, I was listening with different ears, watching with trained eyes. Near the end, Lucas clicked to a slide about culture and recognition. We know financial compensation matters, he said, but appreciation is about more than numbers on a paycheck. It's about feeling seen and valued. That's why we've invested more than ever in our recognition program this year. I raised my hand. The mic coordinator hesitated when they saw my hand in the air. Lucas Hayes nodded for them to proceed, probably, expecting a softball question about team appreciation or future growth plans. I have a question about the recognition budget, I said, standing up with the calendar under my arm. Specifically about how our investment translates into what we actually receive. A few curious heads turned in my direction. Lucas smiled his practiced CEO smile. Of course, Maxwell. We put considerable thought into that program. I'm happy to discuss it. I walked down the aisle, not theatrically, just methodically, the way I'd approach a briefing in the Navy. This wasn't about making a scene. It was about presenting facts that needed to be addressed. I've been here 23 years, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the conference hall. This is what I received to mark our best quarter in company history. I handed the calendar to CFO Claire Thompson in the front row. She took it, surprised, and opened it. The cheap cover, the Sharpie scrawl, the blank monthly grids. I looked up the product code. I continued, conversationally. It retails for about $9, but the invoice we paid Premier Business Services was $38,600 for premium executive calendars and holiday packages for our 120 employees. That comes to over $321 per package. A murmur spread through the room like a slow wave. People started doing the math in their heads. I didn't accuse anyone of theft. I didn't point at Oliver, who I could see 3 rows back, his face going pale. I just asked the question the numbers demanded. So my question is, when we say we're investing more than ever in appreciation, is this the outcome you intended? Lucas's polished smile flickered for just a second. Then he caught it. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," he said carefully. "We take how we recognize our people very seriously. We'll review those details and follow up appropriately." He moved on to the next agenda item, but the damage was done. People filtered back to their desks afterward, buzzing in a way free pastries don't cause. I caught fragments of conversations, over $300 each. And where did the money go? The calendar had become more than a cheap gift. It was evidence, which brings us back to that moment with Oliver at my desk the next morning. He'd been sitting in that conference hall, arms folded tight across his chest like he was holding something in. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. To him, that calendar wasn't paper and plastic. It was a live explosive that had just gone off in front of the entire company. Now, less than 24 hours later, he stood at my workstation, trying to stitch his authority back together with forced nonchalance. "So," he said, leaning against the partition with theatrical ease. "You using your calendar?" He wanted me flustered. He wanted me to laugh it off, to say something small and safe that would let him walk away feeling like he'd reasserted control. But I'd crossed a line the moment I stood up in that meeting, and there was no going back. "No," I said, meeting his eyes without blinking. I left it on Mr. Hayes's desk with our profit numbers written inside. The smirk didn't just fade, it evaporated. His pupils dilated. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Why would you do that?" he asked, voice cracking on the first syllable. He wasn't really asking why. He already knew how it would look. The CEO, fresh off a speech about shared success and meaningful appreciation, walking into his sunlit office to find a clearance bin calendar sitting dead center on his walnut desk. On the right-hand page, 3 lines in neat script. Quarterly revenue, $195 and net profit, $58. My bonus, $0. Beneath it, a single sentence. "This is what celebrating excellence together looks like this year." "I didn't write your name on it," I said softly. "I didn't need to." For a heartbeat, he looked like he might say something cutting, maybe try to shame me for overreacting. But the words died in his mouth. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked too fast toward the elevators, his polished shoes clicking like a countdown. The next 72 hours unfolded like a methodical audit of consequence. You could feel the air change, not with shouting or panic, but with the quiet tightening of protocols, the subtle realignment of power. First, the finance portal updated overnight. Premier Business Services expenses, once accessible to senior staff for budget transparency, now displayed a stark red banner. Access restricted, under review. No explanation, just a digital door slamming shut. Second, Claire Thompson started appearing on our floor with increasing frequency. Not in passing, not for casual coffee runs. She moved with purpose, tablet in hand, exchanging hushed words with HR near the break room. Her usual calm was replaced by something sharper, a laser focus that said this wasn't about a misordered gift. This was forensic. Third, the email arrived at 7:03 a.m. on the second morning. Recognition Program Internal Audit. Attendees, CFO, HR Director, Compliance, Officer. Optional. Maxwell Reed. As if they didn't already know I was the reason the meeting existed. I clicked accept without hesitation. This wasn't about being invited, it was about being witnessed. The conference room was bathed in flat, institutional light. Oliver was already there, sitting at the far end of the table like he was trying to put physical distance between himself and the truth. Without an audience or scripted talking points, he looked smaller, frailer. His usual confidence had been replaced by nervous energy that made him tap his pen against his notepad like a metronome counting down his own undoing. Claire sat at the head, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Sophie Davis from HR wore her professional neutrality like armor, eyes soft, voice measured, but posture rigid with anticipation. Jordan Price from Compliance looked exactly like he did in our annual ethics videos. Mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, salt and pepper hair. Except now he wasn't reading from a script. He was holding real documents. A finance analyst I'd never seen before sat near the wall, fingers resting on a keyboard, a stack of printed pages beside her, like evidence at a trial. "Maxwell, thank you for joining us," Claire said, her voice warm but precise. "Of course," I replied, pulling out a chair. Oliver forced a laugh. Too quick, too high. "Yeah, we're just clearing up some confusion about vendor substitutions," he said, waving a hand like it was a minor clerical hiccup. "Holiday rush, things get mixed up." Before I could respond, the analyst slid a manila folder to the center of the table. On top, the Q4 invoice from Premier Business Services, premium executive desk calendars and holiday appreciation packages, 120 units at $321.67 per package. Total, $38,600. Beneath it, encased in a clear plastic sleeve, was my calendar's packing slip. Same PO number, same delivery date. Description: standard desk calendar, model DC 402, retail, $8.99. "Mr. Reed," Jordan said, turning to me, with the methodical precision I remembered from my own military briefings. "Can you confirm this is what you received?" "Yes," I said. "That's the model number, that's the item, and that's Oliver's note inside." Sophie placed another sheet on the table. "This is the vendor approval form for Premier Business Services, signed off by you, Oliver. You also authored the business case for increasing the recognition budget from $75,000 to $145,000 over the past 3 years. Correct?" "Right," Oliver said, his voice tight. "We needed to scale the program. More employees, bigger company. Premier offered a full-service package, warehousing, fulfillment, customization." "There was no customization," I said quietly. He shot me a look that was sharp, almost pleading, but I held his gaze steady. The truth was the truth. Jordan turned back to the table without missing a beat. He pulled another page from his file. The methodical approach reminded me of military intelligence briefings where every piece of evidence built toward an inevitable conclusion. "This isn't an isolated incident," he said. "We cross-referenced 12 quarters of invoices against employee reports, exit interviews, and delivery confirmations. The pattern is consistent. Premium packages billed, significantly cheaper items delivered. In some cases, like Q2 of last year, nothing was delivered at all." Claire folded her hands on the table. "And all those invoices were approved by you, Oliver, with no documented complaints to the vendor. No credit memos, no follow-up correspondence about delivery discrepancies." Oliver laughed. Too loud this time, the sound bouncing off the glass walls like a desperate echo. "Are we seriously doing this over a calendar? You're going to blow this up because one employee got precious about a stocking stuffer?" Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This isn't about a calendar. This is about $273,000 in company funds over 4 years with no clear justification. And a vendor registered to an address that appears to be connected to your personal network. Silence. Thick absolute. The analyst clicked a key. A screen on the wall lit up with 2 columns of information. Premier Business Services registration address. 1947 Riverside Drive, Unit 4B. Oliver Bennett, emergency contact file. Ryan Clark, 1847 Riverside Drive, Unit 4B. Care to explain that connection? Jordan asked, his tone remaining professionally neutral. Oliver's face twisted, and in that moment of desperation he turned to me like I was somehow the villain in this story. "This is your fault," he hissed. "You think they actually care about you? You're just a name in a spreadsheet. I'm the one who brought in the Morrison account, who streamlined operations." "I'm going to stop you there," Claire said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "HR will schedule a separate conversation with you to discuss your concerns." The meeting stretched another 40 minutes. Questions about timelines, delivery logs, system access protocols, answered plainly. No embellishment, just facts lined up like dominoes in a military briefing. The training never really leaves you. When I left, Oliver remained trapped in that conference room with the evidence, the witnesses, and the slow unraveling of a scheme built on the assumption that no one would notice or care enough to speak up. Some people imagine justice as dramatic confrontations and viral whistleblower videos that force immediate resignations. In real life, especially in places that pride themselves on process and procedure, justice is methodical, administrative, a series of checkboxes in a compliance portal and access revocations at 2 a.m. The changes began not with a bang, but with quiet deletions. First, Oliver's name vanished from the procurement approval workflow, not with an announcement, just gone. One day his digital signature was required for anything over $5,000. The next, the drop-down menu didn't include him. Then his name disappeared from the weekly leadership sync calendar. By Thursday, his profile was scrubbed from the internal org chart. No replacement listed, no interim lead named, just a blank space where Director of Operational Enablement used to be. He still came in, same khakis, same half-smile, same habit of leaning against cubicle partitions, but the energy around him had shifted. People didn't avoid him. They just didn't include him. Emails that once CC'd him now stopped short. Meeting invites excluded him without comment. The system had already diagnosed him as non-essential. 4 days after the audit meeting, I was in the lobby waiting for my morning coffee when Oliver strode in at 9:15, right on schedule. He swiped his badge at the turnstile. Red light. He paused, frowned, swiped again. Red again. Security guard Alex Turner stepped out from behind the desk. "Oliver, can you come with me for a moment?" No escalation, no confrontation, just a quiet escort down the hall to conference room B, the one with no windows used for exit, interviews, and disciplinary conversations. 20 minutes later, Oliver walked back through the lobby with a cardboard box in his arms, tie slightly crooked, face expressionless, as if he'd rehearsed this walk 100 times in his head. No one said goodbye. Not out of cruelty, just because there was nothing left to say. By the time I returned to my desk, the email had hit every inbox. Personnel update, effective immediately. Oliver Bennett is no longer with Apex Solutions. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors. 2 things happened after that. First, the recognition program changed overnight. Premier Business Services vanished from the approved vendor list as if it had never existed. In its place appeared a new budget line: Direct Employee Awards. Internal administration. No external vendor, no premium packages, just a transparent, internally managed fund where milestone anniversaries and project completions would be processed by HR and finance jointly, with receipts, approval trails, and actual accountability. Second, Claire called me into a meeting. She sat across from me in a small conference room, looking tired. Not the performative exhaustion of leadership retreats, but the real kind that comes from realizing your company culture had been compromised by someone you'd trusted. "I'm not going to pretend we handled this well," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "You shouldn't have had to leave a calendar on the CEO's desk to get our attention." Inside wasn't merchandise or gift cards. It was a compensation adjustment letter. Back pay for all milestone awards I should have received over the past 4 years, calculated at the originally approved program rates. A base salary increase retroactive to the start of the fiscal year, aligning me with market benchmarks for my role and experience. And a one-time payment labeled Systemic Recognition Gap Adjustment. "This isn't severance," she clarified. "You're underpaid relative to market. This is us correcting that. The numbers weren't generous. They were correct. Not a reward, but a restoration. Like returning a borrowed book you'd long assumed was lost." The next day, Lucas asked to see me. In 23 years at Apex, I'd been in his office 3 times, once to fix a frozen projector, once for a group commendation, and now this. He closed the door. "I don't enjoy being called out in front of the entire company," he said without preamble. "I didn't enjoy what the numbers revealed," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. You embarrassed me, and you were right." He gestured to his desk. The calendar was still there, open to January, my handwriting stark against the blank notes page. "Does fixing the program and adjusting your compensation resolve this for you?" It was a risk assessment disguised as concern, but I answered honestly anyway. "It fixes the immediate numbers. It doesn't change the fact that it took a public confrontation for leadership to examine. Invoices you'd been approving for years. You planning to leave?" "Eventually. I'll finish current client engagements. I won't leave my team stranded, but I'm not building another decade here." He didn't argue, just nodded once. "I'd appreciate it if you'd document your findings so we can ensure this doesn't happen again." Already did. It's in the shared drive under Procurement Oversight Recommendations. 8 months later, I did submit my resignation. My next role was at a smaller engineering firm where financial transparency was treated with the same seriousness as safety protocols. Where we're like family meant they invested in your actual future, not just your emotional attachment to the company. On my last day, before heading to the parking lot, I stopped by reception and handed the coordinator a small package addressed to Lucas. Inside was a proper calendar, heavy stock paper, elegant typography, no sunset photos or corporate slogans. On the first page, I'd written, "Recognition costs more than $6. So does losing the people who deliver your record quarters." I walked out into the afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, I wasn't angry, just clear. Hannah was waiting in the car, engine running. Our daughter had made Dean's List that semester, and we'd been able to pay her tuition without touching our retirement savings, thanks to the back pay and salary adjustment. "How do you feel?" Hannah asked as I buckled my seatbelt. "Satisfied," I said, "like completing a mission." The calendar had never been the insult. It had been the translator, converting everything they'd been wordlessly telling me about my worth into cardboard and ink, where I couldn't ignore it anymore. They thought they were giving me a place to write appointments. What they actually gave me was a line in the sand. Most workplace injustices aren't solved by dramatic confrontations or righteous speeches. They're solved by competent people who refuse to pretend they don't see what's happening, who document everything with military precision, and who understand that sometimes the most powerful response isn't anger, it's systematic accountability. When you've spent years earning respect through results, people listen when you finally speak up with facts instead of feelings.